The series that you're taking in today is a series called North Star Voices, and Frank's talk is the first of what will be several that will happen throughout the year. North Star Voices focuses on the natural and built landscapes of Minnesota that you might not otherwise hear about, and so some really unique presentations. If you want to know more, we have a flyer out where you are filling out surveys at the end of our talk today. Now, I want to also acknowledge the Maurice Stans Fund. That is what has funded our talk today, as well as members. Do we have any members in the house? Oh yeah, we've got a few. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being a member. It really, you are a driving force in the work that we do, so thank you so much. But without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker today. Now, Frank Bures is an award-winning writer whose work has appeared in Harper's, Outside, The Atlantic, and many other publications. His stories have been included in the Best American Travel Writing Anthologies, and he is quite local. He lives in Minneapolis. The book that just came out back in April, Pushing the River, will be available for purchase after the talk, and there will be a book signing in the rotunda, and I cannot encourage you enough to purchase the book and to continue the conversation afterwards. But for now, let's hear from Frank Bures. So put your hands together.
All right, thank you, Christian. Well, my name is Frank Bures. I'm a writer in town here in the Twin Cities, and I'm going to be talking about this book, which came out in April, as Christian said, Pushing the River. And it's essentially a collection of canoeing stories. I write about a lot of different things, and at some point I realized that I had written like a lot of canoe stories and thought it'd be fun to put them together in a collection like this, and just have something fun that people could take along to their cabin or on a trip or something like that. And it's got quite a few different kinds of stories. There's some about first-person stories. There's some third-person stories. One of the stories is about the Pagami Creek Fire, if you guys remember that, in the Boundary Waters, and two kayakers who were caught in the Pagami Creek Fire and came pretty close to not making it out. Another story is about my own kind of close call in the Mississippi River, where I tipped in really cold water and also came pretty close to not making it out. Another story, more lighthearted, is a lot of them are more lighthearted than that. Is about we took a family trip down the Mississippi from Minneapolis to Winona a few years ago and camped on islands, and it was a super fun trip and fun story as well. There's also a profile of Devin Brown, if you guys know her. She's a local paddler who moved to Minnesota just because of the Mississippi River and is working toward a descent of the whole river from source to sea. There's one other section in the book is about the Guinness World Record for paddling the Mississippi from Lake Itasca to the Gulf of Mexico, and I was pretty involved with these reporting on these attempts, and also I was involved with the attempts as well. In 2021, there were two different teams they used to be one team, and they split up and were kind of in a race for the record for paddling down the Mississippi. And I was on the support crew for the Mile Marker Zero team, which actually did get the record. But the piece on being in the support crew, there was a lot of adventure just in that too. This is a picture of our support boat, which was a pontoon with a cradle mounted on the side, and because of some logistical things, we didn't test it all that much, and this is the first time it's going into the water fully loaded with all its things on it. It had like a generator, 2 refrigerators, a microwave, a bunch of different stuff on here, and so when we put it in the water, it was pretty loaded down. I don't know if you can see that, but there's not a lot of give there. And it actually had trouble keeping up with the canoe as well. And so there's another picture of it. And so these guys offloaded some stuff and continued down overnight to Lake City following the canoe. And I was scheduled to get on the boat in the morning as part of the day crew. So I drove down to Lake City and was waiting for them to show up. And I heard the sirens go off, and I was like, what is that about? And then the rescue boat goes racing out across Lake Pepin, and then a few minutes later, it came back with nobody rescued. And then a few minutes after that, these guys came into the port, and they're like, yeah, haha, somebody thought we were sinking. But then we pulled the boat out and pulled the plugs on the pontoons, and turns out it was sinking. This goes on for about 3 minutes. So those are some of the stories in the book, but a large chunk of the book is made up by the story of the Paul Bunyan Canoe Derby, which was a race in the 1940s and 50s, and it went from Bemidji to Minneapolis, and it was a 450-mile race. It would take place over like 8 to 10 days, depending on how they divided it up. And the paddlers would stop in these towns overnight and then start up the next day. And there was a lot of teams in it, sometimes as many as 50 canoes racing. And it was conceived as part of the Aquatennial. When the Aquatennial started in 1940, there were two big events. One was the parade and one was the Canoe Derby. And the Canoe Derby would start before the Aquatennial, and then it was timed so that when the canoers got to Minneapolis, it would kick off the Aquatennial. So it was a really big deal, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And because one of the reasons I wanted to have a historical piece in this book that kind of tied things together and showed kind of the history of canoeing and canoe racing in Minnesota and how it became such a big part of our culture. And so this Canoe Derby was a great opportunity for that. There wasn't not a lot of information in the archives about it, but I found most of the information I got was from the actual real-time newspaper reporting on each race. And so the library here has a great searchable database, and so I was able to download, I think it was like 640 articles. So I was able to get each race and then kind of piece them back together and reconstruct the history of the Paul Bunyan Canoe Derby. But another reason I was able to write about it was because I heard about a guy named Bill Smith who was still alive and had raced in 1947 and 1949. And this is Bill, when he was 16 years old, he went with his dad. They entered in the 1947 race. His dad was a professional wrestler and loved to get his name in the paper, so that's one of the reason why they were in the Derby. But Bill kind of got the canoeing bug. And so I went out he also raced in the 1949 race, and I went out to Bill's house. He was 92, I think, when I talked to him, and he still remembered so much and had so many details and stories that had never been reported, that had never been even in the newspaper. And so I was really glad to be able to talk to him and get his stories down. This is, that's Bill and his dad training for the 1947 race. This is Bill and his dad in the start of the 1947 race. You can see the Paul Bunyan statue there in Bemidji, and that's still there today. And so that's where they started. They started on the shore of Lake Bemidji. They would go off and 1 or 2 minute intervals, and I just figured out the guys in the other canoe is Harvey Anderson, who was he was in a lot of the races. He came from Mankato, and I was just up in Ely doing a reading, and there's a guy who bought his canoe from the 1949 race, and it's in the Ely Folk School. So if you want to see that, it's the only canoe that we know of surviving from the Paul Bunyan Canoe Derby, and it's in really good shape too. Another guy I was able to talk to was Stan Drugsma, who raced in the 1960 race, and so I went out and talked to Stan. He was 91 and had a bunch of stories and showed me his scrapbook and everything. And then I wrote a kind of shorter version of the history of the Derby for Minnesota History magazine. And after the story came out, I got an email from a guy up in northern Minnesota who said, my dad was in the Derby and he won it in 1951 and he's still alive. Do you want to talk to him? So we set up a Zoom with Harlow Thompson, who won the Derby in 1951. He was in a bunch of the other Derbies, and Harlow, we talked to him for like an hour, and I was really glad to be able to talk to him because he told me stuff that also was never known. And his dad or his son said that he learned more about the Derby in that hour than he had in the last 70 years. Because these guys didn't really talk about themselves like we like to talk about ourselves. He was Harlow and his uncle Dick were miners, and they would finish their mining shift, and then they would go out and paddle like 20 miles on the Mississippi to train for the race. So I talked to somebody who said they just don't make people like that anymore. And Harlow has since passed away. This was just last fall that I talked to him, and so he was just shy of 100. So I was really glad to be able to talk to him and get his stories. So the Derby, like I said, started in Bemidji. The race started in Bemidji. The first race was in 1940, which was the first year of the Aquatennial. And they would start from the shore. This is a little bit of film that I found in the Gale Library here. There's not that much film of the Derby. There's a couple small clips. But this is from the 1942 race, and you can see they would start out in like 1 minute intervals or 2 minute intervals, depending on the year, and go out across Lake Bemidji and then on to the Winnebagoshish. And it was a big deal that the people really turned out in the towns along the road. There'd be a couple thousand people in these small towns waiting for the canoes to come in, and a lot of them would have festivals that were timed with the Derby. In Bemidji they would have the water festival for the start, so there would be sometimes 3,000-4,000 people out there watching the start of the race. And it was not an easy race. Obviously, it's 450 miles, and I made a list of some of the injuries that people had along the way. There was a lot of like torn ligaments and wrenched shoulders and cuts and sunstroke. A couple of people like fell into the water from sunstroke because it was really hot some years. Everybody got blisters on their hands, and then they would just wrap them and keep paddling. Sometimes the blisters would get infected, and they would still keep paddling. One guy, there was one quote that said, Jesse Tibbetts took his hat off, and half the skin on his forehead came with it from sunburn. So it was a tough race, and these guys were tough people. They would come down the river, and then they would end in Minneapolis, and that would, like I said, start the Aquatennial. They would stop just above the St. Anthony Falls, and then do this big final sprint from Minneapolis, from the University Flats to the Franklin Bridge. And that was the big spectator event. Sometimes the paper said there was like 100,000 people watching. Or later years was 10 or 20,000, which is still a lot. And you can see it's the same as it was then. This is Al Wisniak. He just died a couple years ago. I kind of just missed him, showing off his blisters from the race. This is a photo of the final sprint from the 1940 race. In the foreground there is Ace and Ed Eliason. They were fishermen, woodsmen from Grand Marais. They won the Derby that year. Behind in the background are Bud and Harry Tibbetts, and they were Ojibwe guys from Ball Club, Minnesota. And there was a lot of Ojibwe racers in this race, especially in the early days. And the Tibbetts family in particular was a big family in the Derby. They were always in the top teams, and they won it one year. And Jesse Tibbetts was known as the dean of the Derby. He raced in a few, and then he was the coach as well. And looks like Bud and Harry are kind of talking smack. They won the final sprint that year. They finished second overall in the Derby. Asa and Eliason won the overall Derby that first year. This is another clip that I found in the library. This is the final sprint in the 1946 race. And some questionable paddle handling there, but anyway, these were a big deal. There was like a cash prize for this final sprint, usually $50, which was a lot of money. And like all these people would turn out. There is one other film that Warner Brothers made of the Derby in 1946. It's a 17-minute feature film, and it exists in the UCLA Film Library on 35 millimeter, but I can't figure out how to get it, even though the copyright is expired on it, so I'm not sure. If anybody has any ideas about that, I'd be happy to hear them. After the Derby, they would all climb out on these rickety ladders and then go celebrate at the Aquatennial. This is a photo of the final sprint from the 1947 race. And I love this photo because it's part of a series that I found the other photo, or these guys found the other photo, the publisher, and it's in the same series. And in this photo, you can zoom in and see all the canoe numbers and tell who's who. And so I was really happy that this canoe here is number 3. That's Bill Smith and his dad. In that 1947 race. And this is actually the photo that ended up being the cover of the book, and I was really happy that Bill Smith and his dad ended up on the cover, because Bill's the one who kind of made this whole story possible, or a lot better. That year, 1947, Ray Tibbetts won the race, and Bill Evers, his brother-in-law, and that's them kissing their $500, which in today's money would be a little over $11,000. So it was real money that they were racing for. And Ray Tibbetts was a Ojibwe guy from Ball Club, Jesse Tibbetts' son. And Bill Evers was not Ojibwe, but he married Ray's sister. And Bill was in the 1942 race, and he had never been in a canoe before the start of that race, allegedly, and ended up finishing fifth place. And I talked to Bill Evers' grandson, and they still have this little canoe that he got when they won the race. So that was 1947. In 1948, these guys showed up, Gene Jensen and Tom Estes. And if you know anything about canoeing, especially in Minnesota, you know the name Gene Jensen. He was kind of a genius canoe designer and racer. If you ever used a bent shaft paddle, he's the one who invented that. And this was kind of their first race, as far as I know, their first big race in 1948. And they were actually neighbors and friends with Bill Smith. And Bill sat out this race, but he drove for them and was kind of their support crew. And so he would like lower food from the bridges and meet them at all the stops and everything. And as he did that, there was this one canoe that he saw that he said he kind of fell in love with. Every day he saw it, and he just noticed how it behaved differently. It kind of danced on the waves. And that was a canoe that was built by Jim and Bernie Smith, who were two Ojibwe guys also from Ball Club. And they said that they could go into the woods and come out with a canoe in 7 days. And so they built their own canoes, and we're part of that 3,000-year-old tradition. And they had this canoe that Bill loved, and they ended up finishing in fourth place in that 1948 race, and they won like $150, which would be almost $2,000 today. But Bill asked him over to his house afterwards and offered to buy the canoe for $100, and they agreed, and so they worked out like a payment plan, but that almost doubled their earnings for the year. So the next year, 1949, Bill came back with Jim and Bernie Smith's canoe. That's the only good photo of it. It's not around anymore. It got stolen from Bill's cabin a while ago. But he raced in this race with Bob Bergstrom, and they ended up doing really, really well. They ended up finishing in fourth place. They won $750. There was more money in the race that year, and really did better than they should have for how good of paddlers they were. Bill said they spent more time swimming than they did paddling because the canoe was real tippy and you had to be pretty skilled to keep it upright. So they could have done even better, but they ended up finishing fourth place overall. Jensen and Estes won that race, and then because of the way the race was set up, where every day they would start, and the slowest canoes would start first, and then the faster canoes would start last at 1 and 1 minute intervals. And so all day long, the faster canoes would be passing all the other canoes. And so Jensen saw Bill Smith's canoe, Jim and Bernie Smith's canoe, and he knew he could tell there was something special about it. So after that 1949 race, he was the day after he was over at Bill Smith's house, and he said, "I want to look at that boat." So they lived up in North Minneapolis, all these guys, just like a block off the river. So they took their boats down to the river, paddled around for a while, and after a bit, Gene just said, "Your boat's faster." So Gene wanted to buy it from Bill, but Bill was not selling. But he said he would loan it to him if he kind of straightened it out, because it had a little bit of a bend in it or something. So Gene took it, fixed it up, and then took it up to Lake Classique, which was a big race up in Canada, won that. And then the next year, 1950, he and Estes came back with a boat that was shaped a lot more like Jim and Bernie Smith's canoe. That was 1950. They won that race again. The next year, Jensen was in the Air Force, so Tom Estes raced with his brother, but they just weren't quite as good. And that's the year that Harlow Thompson and his uncle Dick Peck won, and they won in they had a 24-foot-long all-wood canoe that weighed 125 pounds, but he told me they could paddle at like 15 miles an hour, so... Well, I don't know if that was true, but it was fast. It must have been like a missile. Then in 1952, the Derby was canceled, and I couldn't find any reason why it was canceled in the papers. They didn't say anything. They just announced that it was being replaced with the Powerboat Derby. And there was a lot of angry letters to the editor and fighting about what happened to the Derby and mismanagement of the Aquatennial and all kinds of accusations. Which is harder and more manly, canoeing or powerboating. So they eventually restored some of the races. They did one on Bede-Makaska, and they did one from like Anoka to Minneapolis, and they did one from St. Cloud to Minneapolis. So there were some shorter versions. And Buzzy Smith, who's here, was a legendary paddler. He won Lake Classique like 9 times, including once with appendicitis. And Russell Scott was his partner in a lot of those races, and I just found out Russell Scott is still around, so I interviewed him last week, and he was telling me about his days in the Derby. He was in the big Derby once, but he ran out of water and drank river water and got sick and had to drop out. So he was kind of embarrassed that I put that in the book, but... So then in 1959, they brought the full Derby back, and it was a big success. Everybody loved it. There was a ton of teams. It got a huge amount of press and popularity. I got these photos from the Landwehr family. Roy and Dan Landwehr were in the race, and Tom Landwehr were in the race quite a few years. They finished, almost every year they finished 6th place, but this year, 1959, they finished in 2nd place. If you ask them, they should have finished 1st place. That's another story. And there's another one of those photos. I love these photos because there's not hardly any color photos that I could find of the Derby. And they also sent me this photo, which they said was taken by Les Blacklock, the famous Minnesota nature photographer. That race in 1959 was won by Harold Thompson, who was Harlow's younger brother and their cousin, Gordon Kossow. Harold is still around right now. He's 95. I haven't been able to talk to him yet, but I hope to. Then the next year, 1960, the race was held again. It was, again, a huge success. There was almost 50 teams in it. Everybody had a good time, and it was really congenial, and it was just a big success. And Jensen and Estes came back for that 10 years after their last victory and won it again. And the prize by then was $1,500, which is, I think, over $20,000, and in today's money. And they also won a all expenses paid 3-day trip to Las Vegas for 4. So canoeing used to pay. So then in 1961, for reasons that I could never figure out, the race was handed over to the Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts ran it as kind of a relay where your troop would put people in for a certain amount of time, and then they would switch out, and it just didn't. It was in the papers a little bit, but it just didn't have the appeal of the big derby, the professional derby. And so the Boy Scouts ran it for a few years. I think 1964 was the last year that they did it. Some of the people who were Boy Scouts in that race went on to be prominent in the canoeing and racing scene. But that was the end of the Paul Bunyan Canoe Derby in 1960. And a lot of those people who were the top level racers in that derby went on to form the Minnesota Canoe Association, and really drove the canoe racing scene in the late 20th century, which was pretty big. There's still, even today, there's still the Hoygaard races on Wednesday nights, which are from that era. And they also published this magazine for quite a few years, which had all kinds of stuff about canoeing. They wanted to put a canoe park through downtown Minneapolis and all this stuff, which was cool. Here they're documenting it says the hot new MCA look. But Gene Jensen, if you went on to be super influential in canoe building and racing, and if you go today to any canoe race, you'll see Jensen racing canoes. And Winona Canoe still sells Jensen canoes, and so in that way the Derby also had a big impact on canoeing as we know it today. Earlier this summer, I was up in northern Minnesota, and I stopped by the Tibbetts Cemetery, which is in Bald Club, Minnesota. And I just wanted to, I spent all last summer kind of immersed in this stuff and getting to know these people, and so I just wanted to stop by this place, and it was really cool, kind of full circle moment for me, because here were buried all these people who I had been reading about. In the upper left is Ben Tibbetts, who won the 1928 race, which was a precursor to the Derby. Jesse Tibbetts is on the upper right there, who was the dean of the Derby. Ray Tibbetts is in the lower right corner, who's kissing his money. Bill Evers is there. Harry Tibbetts, who was in the photo of the final sprint. So it was kind of meaningful for me to go and just kind of say hi to these guys on their final portage. And it was really a fun project to get lost in. It wasn't this. The story of the Derby takes up about half the book, and it was not supposed to be that long. But I just got completely lost in this research, and it was such a cool era because you had these overlapping eras of the older non-motorized world kind of meshing with the new technological world. Some of these racers were born in the late 1800s, and others of them are still alive today. So it was this kind of unique meeting point of these time frames. And it was also a cool meeting point of cultures, which there aren't that many of, where white and Ojibwe cultures could kind of meet and just compete as on a level playing field. And so I spent so much time lost in this world, and I'm really glad that I did, because a lot of these stories would have been lost. And now, even though most of these people are gone, I hope that their stories will live on. Thank you.